Today I present to you His Majesty's Australian ship HMAS Brisbane in a match on the new map Scandinavia. This is the first and only match that I have so far played on this new map, so I don't have too much to say about it other than some of this island cover actually looks really nice and useful. But I do have a good deal to say on HMAS Brisbane, which is the reward ship for the ongoing Christmas campaign of 2023. It's a legendary tier light cruiser under the Commonwealth flag. That's the first thing we should note because I've seen a bit of confusion in the community about this. This is not a British cruiser, it's an Australian one. So it flies under the Commonwealth flag, and as of this moment, there is only one other ship that flies under that flag, and that is the Tier 5 premium cruiser, HMAS Perth. That is it. It's just Perth and Brisbane under the Commonwealth flag, so there are only two commanders for both of these vessels, and I'll start off by showing you my commander build. I'm actually using the Universal Commander Murray, who would work on any class of ship. And the reason I'm using him is for his second skill, and that is one that buffs the concealment. We'll talk about that in a little bit later when we run down the stats. The other guy is called Xarkun. He was added to the game along with the Perth, and the good deal of his skills deal with buffing smokescreen characteristics because Perth has a smokescreen. Brisbane does not have access to a smokescreen, so those skills would be pretty useless for this ship. And the concealment buff that Murray gives you is pretty good. Plus, he can buff the fire chance, he can buff the HP a little bit, and then he can buff the speed and maneuverability. So I don't think he's a bad choice, especially until we get another dedicated cruiser commander for the Commonwealth, which I assume we will sometime in the future. Maybe one that doesn't have a lot of smoke-related skills, one that would be a little bit more optimal for Brisbane. In any case, we're going to run down the stats, and then I'm going to talk to you about how this ship plays and whether I think it's worth it. So to begin with, keep in mind that all these stats are influenced by the Murray Commander build, starting with the HP, which is 44,510. It's a little bit less than that at base. I think it's pretty much the same amount as the Minotaur, but we've buffed it a little bit thanks to Murray's commander skills. Not a lot of HP, of course. Most of the other cruisers at this tier have much more HP than this, and this is a Minotaur hull, meaning it doesn't have any armor, and it's got a very exposed citadel, so it can be damaged quite easily. As for the guns, there are 10 of them, 152mm guns in 5 double turrets. They fire both high explosive and armor piercing, in contrast to Minotaur, which has access only to AP. Oh, by the way, here's the reason we're using Murray. Our concealment is 9.7 kilometers by sea. We have radar, 10 km range. That means when we're spotted like this and we don't see anything in our line of sight, it means a destroyer is spotting us. So if we pop that radar, we are guaranteed to catch them in radar range since our concealment is smaller than our radar range. That is the concept of stealth radar, which is completely broken, should not be allowed to exist in this game. The Holland and the Elbing had no idea we were hanging around the edge of this cap until they pushed into it and saw us. And by the time they saw us, they were 0.3 km into our radar range, so that it's not like they could disengage and avoid being spotted and taking the damage that this high explosive is dishing out against the Holland, which is pretty good damage, as you can see. Stealth radar is overpowered and should not be allowed to exist. It is not counterable. The destroyers have no warning for it. But if you can utilize it, it's very, very valuable to your team. We spotted both of the destroyers in this cap. One of them is gone. We know the position of the other one. He's trying to fight our battleship there, and he's going to lose most of his HP in the process. That's the whole reason I'm using Murray over Xarkun, is for this stealth radar. In any case, back to the guns. The HE does a maximum of 2,150 damage, and we've got an excellent 11% fire chance with this commander build. I don't know if I mentioned the reload, but the reload is 4.3 seconds, considerably slower than the Minotaurs, but it's still good enough to pump out a respectable amount of DPM, especially with the HE and that fire chance, which causes damage over time. The AP shells do a maximum of 3,200 damage, which I think is the exact same as the Minotaur, although I don't know that these AP shells actually get improved penetration angles, or improved pen characteristics in any way. They might, but to be honest with you, I haven't shot a lot of the AP, and I haven't asked the community managers whether this is true. We might have to follow up on this with another video on Brisbane sometime in the future. In any case, the HE and the AP are both effective. The guns are, of course, floaty because they are Minotaur guns, so they are difficult to aim at range against anything that isn't a battleship, which is another reason that I'm using Murray. You could get 10% extra range with Farncombe, but I think that offers diminishing returns. Torpedoes, perfect time to talk about those. You can see we're launching 10 of them off the starboard side of the ship. We're going to turn around and launch 10 more off of the port side. There are 20 torpedoes in 4 quintuple launchers, 2 on either side of the ship. Unlike Minotaur, however, these torpedoes have a 13.5 kilometer range compared to Minotaur's 10. That makes them a little bit more usable, as the Colombo is going to find out in a little bit. You can see he's not really going in the direction of the torpedoes right now, but he's in a very narrow part of this map where his movements are circumscribed by the islands, and so he doesn't have a lot of options. If he wants to maneuver against this battleship that's in front of him, well, he could turn to the left-hand side of our screen, and if he does, he's going to go right in the path of the torpedoes. Little bit of a spoiler alert there. Anyway, 13.5 km range on these torps, 65 knot speed, which is perfectly good, and they hit for a maximum of 16,767 damage. They're reasonably stealthy too, with a detectability of 1.3 km by C, so not a very huge reaction time. And they reload in 131 seconds. You'll see here as Colombo sails into the path of the second set that they do a good deal of respectable damage, and they're basically going to double our total of damage done at this point from 40-some K to 80-some K. Not a bad opening sequence with this vessel. The AA characteristics on the thing, I don't know how worth going into detail it is to do for AA, because we don't see legendary tier cruisers all that often. For what it's worth, Brisbane has an aggregate AA defense rating of 100, so the AA is probably good. Maneuverability, maximum speed, 34.9 knots with this commander build, which I think is buffing the speed. Otherwise, I think the base speed is something like 33 knots. Not super fast, but not slow. Turning circle 750 meters, which is nice and tight, and then a rudder shift of 8.3 seconds, which is perfectly serviceable. And of course, we've already mentioned the concealment at an excellent, probably best in class 9.7 km by C, thanks to our Murray build. So how does this thing play, and is it worth it? Well, it's basically a Minotaur without access to a smoke screen. Instead, for our consumables, we've got a super heal, just like the Minotaur, and then we've got sonar, which spots ships at 4.9 km and has a 3.5 torpedo detectability range, lasts for an appropriate amount of time for sonar. And we've got the radar, which is 10 km range, but only has a 22-second duration in comparisons to Minotaur's crazy radar, which also has a 10 km range, but I think lasts for 40 seconds. So not quite as terrifying and robust as the Minotaur's actual radar, but obviously one that is useful, particularly if you buff the concealment to the point where the radar outranges your concealment, as we've seen earlier. So this is a light cruiser without access to smoke screen, but with a lot of utility in the form of sonar and radar, and thus it is a support ship. a support ship that is going to rely on island cover to keep itself protected. You're going to have to be an island boy in this thing, as they say. You want to post up behind an island somewhere near a relevant part of the map, and what you want to look for is enemy ships pushing in toward some goal. That goal might be taking one of the capture circles. It might be pushing in to do damage to your team. Either way, ideally, you want to find an island. You want to make that island your waifu, as they say, and then you want to rain down high explosive on the enemy ships that are pushing in. You want to light fires on them, deal damage over time, get some pens with that HE. Once you've got some permafires lit, you can switch to the AP and deal a little bit more damage with that. And of course, you can launch torpedoes on the way in. The torpedoes, by the way, can be launched in a single line because it does retain that particular British characteristic, and that can be useful if you've got to precision aim the torpedoes at maybe a ship that's going to get too close to you by coming around an island. And of course, the extra 13.5 kilometer range means a little bit of an extra chance to hit things that the Minotaur couldn't. I suppose the extra torpedo range and the HE are designed to make up for the fact that you cannot deploy a smokescreen on this. And the fact that you can't deploy a smokescreen probably makes this cruiser a little bit more challenging to play than the Minotaur. So if you're not very good at light cruiser gameplay, you might find yourself struggling a little bit with HMAS Brisbane. It is obviously very dev-strikeable. I have been dev-struck in it because it is, of course, a Minotaur. And if you've played Legendary Tier long enough, then you've shot at Minotaurs or you've been shot at while playing a Minotaur, and you know about that thing's propensity to explode. This thing shares that same propensity, and you cannot reliably bounce any kind of AP except for light cruiser AP with this armor scheme. The Citadel belt is enough to bounce battleship caliber AP sometimes and protect yourself, but it's not a thing that you should rely on, and this is not a cruiser that I think you should be building for agile purposes. It's far too risky, the guns are far too floaty. Much better to find a place on the map where the enemy ship is pushing into you, because if they're pushing into you, they're going to become easier to shoot with each passing moment. These guns are, of course, floaty. If you're going to play it agile and these things or these enemies are going to be maneuvering, or you're going to be shooting at cruisers while you're maneuvering, it's going to be a lot harder to aim these guns. This thing really benefits from island play just like any other light cruiser, and I think it's far too risky to buff that rudder shift. The concealment is much more valuable, especially if you use Murray and you use stealth radar. So I think it's a good, strong ship, but because it doesn't have a smokescreen and relies on island cover, it really requires competent destroyer teammates in order to work. You've got to have intelligence data, you've got to be able to see the enemy ships to shoot at them, and if you have to spot them yourself, in other words, spot with your face, well, your face is likely to get punched and broken by the guns of the battleships you encounter, which can delete you in a single salvo. So this is probably going to be easier to play with a destroyer as in a division, particularly one that can smoke you up. Luckily, in this game, we get a good result because that Shimakaze that spawned with us played the cap expertly, did a little bit of counter-destroyer play, took another cap, torpedoed a battleship, got 2,500 XP. Always nice to see a Shimakaze do so well. Thank you, Shima, for your assistance in this one. And the Brisbane, I think I would recommend it. It's not a bad ship to get. It may be a little bit difficult to play if you're newer to this game, so proceed with caution, but it is objectively a good ship, and it's kind of unique. I mean, it is a copy-paste of the Minotaur, but there's enough different about it to make it a unique experience, so probably not a bad ship to pursue. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.